Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to discuss a serious topic happening every day. Or proper first address way back in the 50s in a case known as Bronx versus Board of E. But the issue still stands. We have to learn together. We have to join hands. With all the benefits that come with integration, why are we still dealing with school segregation?
This is a clip from Laundry City, a student play written and performed by New York City high school students about school segregation. You get the metaphor? Separating kids the way we separate laundry? Yeah. I'm your host, Taylor McGraw, and this is episode 5 of the Bell's first podcast season called Hearts and Minds, an investigation of school segregation through the voices of those most affected by it, students. This episode is called The Movement. You'll hear more from the Laundry City crew and meet the young activists at the center of a student-led effort to integrate the city's public school system. But first, like always, some context. July 24th, 1956. Front page, New York Times. City schools open a major campaign to spur integration. This is 2 years after the Brown v. Board ruling, which compelled the city to form a commission on integration. Not out of a legal obligation. Schools in the North weren't segregated by law. But city leaders felt they had a moral obligation to integrate schools. At that time, about 40% of students were either Black or Puerto Rican. Most attended heavily segregated and plainly inferior schools. Dr. Kenneth Clark, who we heard from in episode 3, was one of the leaders on the city's integration commission. Clark and his colleagues had just released the first piece of a master plan to combat school segregation. Fast forward 9 months. March 1, 1957. The Board of Education unanimously adopts the commission's plan, which includes widespread rezoning of school districts, transferring experienced teachers to the most troubled schools, and undertaking a citywide PR effort to improve race relations. Radical ideas by today's standards. The plan would take effect in the fall of 1958 and be in, quote, full swing by 1959. That's exactly what happened. Schools integrated peacefully and began to reflect the city's vibrant diversity. New York City became a national model for urban school systems. Over the next few decades, urban schools became thriving hubs of educational success and innovation, the prize jewel of our nation's grand experiment in democracy. At least, that's what could have happened. Instead, outspoken white parents with outsized political influence squashed integration efforts before they began. As it turned out, Jim Crow existed in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Jackson Heights, Queens, in Little Rock, and in Little Italy. In the fall of 1957, the eyes of the nation focused on the standoff at Little Rock Central High School between 9 Black teenagers and Arkansas segregationist governor Orville Faubus. Here's Mike Wallace interviewing Faubus mid-crisis, September 15th.
Governor, what's your opinion of the crowds of white adults who gather outside of Central High School each weekday morning? They curse at any Negro who happens to pass by. They call Negroes animals. And almost to a man, they say Governor Faubus has done the right thing. What do you think of these people?
Well, malice, envy, hate is deplorable in any place or in any circumstances. But as President Eisenhower has said himself, you can't change the hearts of people by law. Now, in view of the progress that we have made, all I ask for in this situation, and all I've ever asked for, is some time for the situation to change, for it to become acceptable so that there would not be disorder and violence.
Translation, there's some nice people in those crowds. Just give them a little time.
If it is right, it will come about. So why should we be so impatient as to want to force it?
Meanwhile, in New York City, representatives from white parents groups were saying the same thing as Faubus behind closed doors with city leaders. The New York Times quoted one of these white representatives as saying his group is opposed to forced integration, but would be okay with, quote, normal, natural integration. Over the next few years, as school leaders sat on their hands, civil rights groups, including the NAACP, the Urban League, and Congress of Racial Equality, grew increasingly impatient. Under the leadership of a Brooklyn minister and grassroots organizer, Milton Galamison, they began threatening a massive boycott. In late January of 1964, the Board of Education responded by releasing yet another comprehensive integration plan.
To improve ethnic distribution in our schools, in addition to the steps the school system has been taking for a number of years,
this is School Board President James Donovan.
We are proposing the following: elementary school community zoning, changes in feeder patterns of sets of junior high schools, elimination of heavy concentration of minority group pupils in high schools.
But Black and Puerto Rican communities were fed up with plans. Donovan gave these remarks January 29th. 5 days later, nearly 500,000 Black and Puerto Rican students skipped school. The students, their parents, and hundreds of teachers marched peacefully through the streets chanting, "Jim Crow must go." The 1964 New York City school boycott was and remains the largest civil rights demonstration in U.S. history.
Malcolm X, what brings you here today?
Well, I'm out here to see the successful expose of the New York City school system. It proves that you don't have to go to Mississippi to find a segregated school system. We have it right here in New York City.
Are you supporting this boycott?
Yes, I did support it. I came as an observer, and I supported it because it shows that the problems that the white liberals have been pointing the finger at the Southern segregationists and condemning them for exist right here in New York City.
The march was a singular success, but in the months after, the Integration Coalition, unhappy with Galamison's leadership, splintered. Meanwhile, white parents' groups grew increasingly entrenched. They even planned their own marches and boycotts.
Well, we feel that we can prove as much as our opponents who use the same tactics. We feel that we have as much right as they would. These are our civil rights, and we're taking advantage of them.
They organized under coded names the Special Committee for the Preservation of Neighborhood Schools, the Parents and Taxpayers Association. But their motives were the same as the Southern segregationists, to keep Black and brown kids out of their white schools. The main difference? The Northerners were more successful. We don't teach students the history of failed integration in the North, and because we've never confronted it, we now implicitly accept segregation as a fact of life. 60 years after the city's Commission on Integration completed its master plan, the schools in New York City are even more segregated than they were back then. Integration has become a political third rail. The current administration won't even use the term. Optimism among integration advocates is tempered by the realities of housing segregation and low white enrollment in public schools. And while many educators think integration is important, few consider it practical. But don't tell that to this young woman.
I honestly just want to welcome everyone that's here on an early Saturday morning. I know it's probably hard getting out of bed, and I know last night there was prom for some of us, so I know that was intense, but I admire everyone's ability to be here today for such an important cause.
This is Hebh Jamal. She's the lead student activist of a movement called Integrate NYC for Me. She's speaking right now at the group's youth symposium at Columbia's Teachers College back in May.
I actually want to start off with the story of how I joined Integrate. And I go to a very, let's say, affluent school that is majority white.
Hebh is from the South Bronx. She said one day she visited another high school that better reflected the city's demographics. And
the feeling of diversity and the feeling of inclusivity felt abnormal to me, and I didn't understand why at first. I went back to school that same day, and I actually had a conversation with the teacher here in this room, and we, researched a lot in trying to figure out why I felt the way I did. And fast forward a couple weeks, it was because I realized that New York City has the most segregated schools in the country. And through that, I began to question more and wanted to seek more answers. And through that, I actually found Integrate New York City for me. I found the Sarah Zappler and Sarah Casually. And we had a lot of conversation about how I could join the movement, how I could really try to figure out how to integrate New York City schools.
Before we get into the work that Hebh and Integrate NYC for me are doing, I want to back up so you can understand her journey. We met about a year ago at a meeting of a few dozen school integration advocates. Hebh was one of a handful of teenagers in the room, and she did not hesitate to speak up during the meeting. So I went up and talked to her afterwards, told her about the bell, and she invited me to come interview her at her high school. This is October 2016. Great. So first off, again, thank you for agreeing to sit down with me and talk.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you just start by talking a little bit about your background in the school system in New York? What experiences have you had here?
So I was in a diverse middle school.
Mm-hmm.
You saw all different types of people, and I did feel comfortable. I had a very diverse friend group. I had a friend from Vietnam. I had a Puerto Rican friend, a black friend, Arab, Muslim, Christian, atheist. I lived in a very diverse environment. But then, applying to high school was so just overbearing, I guess. And I feel like a lot of 8th graders will tell you this as well, because as 12 and 13-year-olds, figuring out where you want to spend 4 years of your life is a big deal. But all we're given is this maybe, 500-page book, and we have to figure out hundreds of different high schools that we want to apply to, and you don't really get told much about it. So how I found the school that I go to, it was just, I just looked at dropout rates or graduation rates. That's all I looked at. And as an 8th grader, that's the only indication of what it means to be a good school is how many kids go to college. I feel like that's a problem. And there's not many indicators of what's a good school, what's a bad school. Should we be looking at diversity, or should we be looking at AP classes? What are we getting? And it was just not communicated properly.
Hebh has zeroed in on one of the policies that keeps high schools segregated, the open choice admissions process. As I described in episode 2, this choice system favors certain types of students because the best high schools are allowed to screen applicants. For example, these selective high schools might require a B average in middle school, or you might have to submit a portfolio, or
some of them you need to have an interview for, but you've never been prepped for an interview in your life, or you need to have so many extracurriculars, but you have to take care of your brother and sister after school, while your parents work from 9 to 6. So how is that fair when you're expecting the same kind of outcomes on all students, when all students live totally different lives? Some can go and, be in a band and join soccer teams and have so many things going for them, but other students don't. So why is one type of student capable of going to a great prestigious school and another one is not?
As a student from the Bronx commuting to an affluent, selective school in midtown Manhattan, Hebh had a unique lens. Unlike most students from the Bronx, she got to see what was on the other side of the fence.
It's sad because my cousin has to go through a metal detector every day and has to be pat down because she wears a headscarf like me, and there's sometimes pins, and her cell phone gets locked up in a compartment, and there's a long line to class, and you're exhausted. You wake up at 7 in the morning, and I don't have to go through that. And what's the difference? Why? We're 5 miles apart. There's the main difference is that certain type of students go here and certain type of students go here.
And that made her kind of obsessed with a simple question. How could public schools in New York City look so different?
Eventually, I was speaking to Brad Lander about it, Councilman Brad Lander, and...
How did you get in touch with Brad Lander?
So actually, his son goes to my school, and he saw me talking a lot about it, and he was like, I think you would really like talking to my dad about this. So I actually emailed him. And he was, he just invited me to his office, and we had just a conversation about it. It was around an hour conversation, just me and him, and looking at data and looking at charts and looking at what does it mean.
In case it wasn't already clear, Hebh is not your average teenager. She had no qualms about emailing a city council member to talk about school segregation. or bringing it up in her conversations with peers at her affluent high school.
Some really get it. Some are like, yeah, that's true. Why did I get accepted and this other student didn't? Like, well, am I just luckier? Was it the middle school I go to? And other students were like, no, I earned it. I earned to be here. Like, my parents, worked hard and I worked hard and I just deserve to be here and you don't. And it's the level of, I guess, it's just like a mentality, like a competitive, I guess, I don't know, capitalist mentality, I guess. I don't know, it's like getting deep into it, but just we care about where we go to school and we care about how much money we make or where we end up. And the reality is we don't want to be told that, the process isn't fair. We don't want to be told that, you got here for like arbitrary, superficial reasons or like just by luck. People don't want to be told that. And it's hard to realize that you're privileged. So it's definitely a mixture.
I guess the same could be said for adults. Some get it, some don't. And I understand that. Like Hebh pointed out, if you're someone who benefits from the system, you don't want to admit that it's an unfair system because that says something about you.
My point is there needs to be a conversation about our commitment to integration because we know its benefits. We know that it's good for our students. So right now, the question shouldn't be whether it's good or bad. The question should be, how could we do that? And it's good to have differences of opinion. It's good to debate about it because at least you're debating something that is already like reaffirmed, like something we all agree on. Like, this is bad. We're like, okay, great. We all think it's bad. Let's get to work. And that process isn't like fully a thing yet. So we're still maybe like 20% into, is this a problem? And why are we 20% into this is a problem? If the whole idea of integrating schools the debate was 50 years ago or however many years ago. Yeah. So we really need to start answering the question, and everyone hasn't answered it yet. That's bad.
So whose job is it to lead that conversation?
Oh my God. Okay, so everyone. So students in particular, just really letting students know, because again, Brown versus Board of Ed, that was students and teachers and parents, and this should be the same. This should be a movement where students are really outraged that this is a problem, that certain students are at a disadvantage. And once we get through the whole, once teachers and educators and students, and I feel like there's enough of these people in the city in particular that really care about the city as a whole. And if the city as a whole is doing well, then you're doing well, So like, I think that the movement should be primarily from students because we're being affected by it, but also should be led by educators, politicians, and teachers that see the effect in everyday life.
Yeah.
So really everyone should be a part of this conversation because everyone's being affected by it.
Yeah. Okay, this is a good place to pause. We'll be back with more from Hebh after a quick message.
Hi, this is Alex.
And this is Andrea.
We're huge fans of The Bell and really proud of all the hard work that Taylor has put into making this show very powerful.
We encourage all you listeners to go on iTunes and leave a review, which will help grow the Bell podcast audience. In addition, we encourage you to tell your friends, family, and coworkers to check out the show.
Even tell a stranger if you feel it's safe enough to do so. Or if you have an ex that you'd like to reconnect with, this would be the perfect place to start. I've tried it, and it works.
Also, to see more content about the impact of school segregation, check out bellpodcast.com. And if you haven't already, follow the podcast on Twitter and on Facebook @bellpodcast.
Thanks for listening.
And enjoy the rest of the show.
As you heard earlier, eventually Hebh connected with a student-led initiative called Integrate NYC for Me. It was founded in the Bronx a few years ago by 6 high school students and their teacher, Sarah Camasholi. Ever since then, they've been advocating for integrated, equitable schools across New York City. They've done panels, roundtables, marches, you name it. When Hebh linked up with them, she took the platform and ran with it. Last year, she testified at the U.S. Department of Education. She's featured in a documentary called Teach Us All that's debuting soon on Netflix. And in February, I saw Hebh on a panel at Columbia University sitting next to legendary civil rights activist Angela Davis. But don't let her public profile mask the grassroots organizing that she's leading behind the scenes.
Okay, so I actually came up with the idea in sometime early February.
This is February 2016.
I was like, there should be more student voice in this, and not just people in suits, men and women in suits behind a desk deciding our fate. We should do it for ourselves and influence policy. So I told the idea to Sarah, and she was so excited about it. She's like, all right, let's do this. So we got a sponsorship, we got, a budget, and we're really like, the council is really to amplify the voices of the students. And once we do that, like once a lot of students get involved, I mean, our first meeting was a month ago and around 30, 40 students were involved. And that's amazing. It was our first meeting and I just saw so much energy, so many educators, so many people that care. And if everyone knew about this, the movement will be unstoppable. And I want it to be a force where the policymakers, the DOE, have to get our approval before doing anything else. That's how much I want there to I want us to have that power and to have that voice, and you have to listen to us because otherwise you're not going to get something done. We started with a media campaign, hashtag Make America Integrate. So it's INTA and then GREAT, it's a play on words. So we we've created a social media campaign, and we, tweeted it, and we're actually having a lot of responses back to it and just getting the movement out there. So once we do that and have more people on board, I really want there to be a mobile force.
This Student Integration Coalition came up with a set of policy priorities that Hebh calls the 5 R's. Here she is describing them at the Youth Symposium at Teachers College this May.
We have 5 different committees that we wanted to lead on. The first one was race and enrollment, the idea that something like admissions could actually segregate the schools themselves. And then you had relationships. Once you get students inside the school, how do they treat each other? How does faculty treat the students? And then you had resource allocation. Some schools across the city have more than others. We're trying to figure out why and how to tackle that. And then you have restorative justice. So students in a school, disciplinary suspensions, students of color are discriminated against. And so how do you tackle how to try to get ethical disciplinary codes for schools? And then the last one is actually representation. So it's not only diversity across student lines, but it's diversity across faculty and teachers. And so over the past couple months, we've really tried to focus on these 5 components and 5 committees.
Hebh, along with her classmate and fellow organizer Elijah, took the lead on the first R, race and enrollment. They did extensive research into the city's high school choice process. Here's Elijah.
This system was actually put into place to improve the education system and make sure that we could have schools that were most fitting for each individual kid. But what the school choice system has allowed for is parents with extra resources are able to game the system. They're figuring out exactly what it takes to get their kids into these right schools. And the school choice system, in effect, is segregating our schools.
Hebh and Elijah demonstrated exactly how this happens by running anonymous profiles of real students through a sample admissions algorithm.
Student B is an average student who attends a focused middle school, and they are a social person. They did really good on their interviews. Their GPA is a solid 75 across the board. For student C, they struggle in school. Their middle school is about to get shut down. Their GPAs were below average, including test scores.
Not surprisingly, the students with attributes signaling middle-class status were more likely to get in. But then Hebh and Elijah did a second trial, where they tweaked the algorithm to give extra weight to factors such as
mother's education level, free or reduced price lunch, type of middle school, and whether or not the student was an English language learner.
When they adjusted these criteria, it created better racial and socioeconomic balance in who got in. This was a simple demonstration, but if this mindset were applied across the system, it could make an enormous difference in integrating schools.
These metrics are actually being done in places like California, Louisville. I know I'm missing some places, but this is basically done across the country in specific points, and they're proven to actually create a more integrated school.
To be clear, to achieve school integration, we're not talking about setting aside spots for students of color who don't meet the standards that a school is setting. To achieve true integration, we actually have to change the standards for the kind of kid that we're trying to accept. We have to broaden what we're looking for beyond the traits that are only found, or most commonly found, among white and affluent students.
The question I have is whether school leaders will have more courage than their predecessors 60 years ago to follow the lead of students and see that integration becomes a reality. Hebh is a freshman at City College this year, and her activism isn't slowing down anytime soon. In fact, if you want to see it in real life, I've got the perfect opportunity. On Tuesday, September 19th, at the Schomburg Center in Harlem, Hebh and other members of Teens Take Charge, the student-led group I help facilitate, will be talking about segregation and other education issues with city and school officials on stage. You don't want to miss it. The event is from 6 to 8 p.m. It's free and open to the public. You can find the RSVP link in the show notes or go directly to teenstakecharge.com and click on events. Hope to see y'all there. We're going to end this episode where we started, with Laundry City, the youth theater production about school segregation. They performed at Integrate NYC for Me's Youth Symposium and have more performances coming up this fall. You can find that information in the show notes as well. For now, here is one of my favorite scenes. Enjoy.
And now a separate but equal bedroom.
Yo, Rich.
For real?
What are you doing? Rich, what are you doing? Yo, my man!
Okay. You see this line? That's your side, this is my side. Got it?
What the hell are you doing?
Rezoning.
What?
This side is safe, that side is dangerous.
You serious? Man, you selfish prick.
You see? That's what I'm talking about. That side is too dangerous. I just don't feel safe.
We roughhouse all the time. Now it's a problem?
That side is dirty. Look at that nasty stain in the corner.
That was from your dinner 2 weeks ago. You never bothered to clean it up.
I don't recall that. Plus, this side has better resources.
What are you talking about?
This side has a window. That side has that old radiator. It's probably radioactive. Plus, this side has a desk, a laptop.
That is my laptop. I gave you my password and I gave you my username.
I don't recall that.
I have the receipt.
Can I see that? Plus, this side gets better test scores.
What do you mean?
You know what I mean.
If I knew what you meant, I would have been asking, dumbass.
You see, that's what I mean. That profanity, that's so that side.
What do you mean by better test scores?
When I study on that side, I'm just too irritable. I just get low test scores. When I study on this side, it's fantastic. I do so much better.
Man, you don't get your dumb ass out of here.
Hey, you see, that's what I'm talking about. That's disrespectful. You stay right here. I'll be right back.
That's our show. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter @Bell Podcast, and don't forget to leave that iTunes review. I'll be checking. We have one final episode left in the season coming your way next month. Thanks for listening.